Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me.
A mystery buried in time. For centuries, these words of David have puzzled scholars. Why would a man after God's own heart speak of his birth with such sorrow? What secret was hidden in his past? Buried deep in ancient Jewish tradition lies a forgotten tale of a mother's silent suffering, a father's doubt, and a birth that nearly cost a future king his destiny. This is the story of Nitzevet, the mother history forgot. Her name was Nitzevet, daughter of Adiel. Though the Bible does not name her, ancient Jewish tradition preserves her story a tale of heartbreak, deception, and an unlikely birth that almost kept David from his destiny. This is not just the story of a shepherd boy who became king. This is the story of a forgotten mother whose pain shaped the future of Israel. Why did Jesse, man known for his righteousness, turn away from his own wife? And why was David, God's chosen one, treated as an outcast in his own home? The answers lie in a hidden crisis, a maidservant's deception, and an unexpected birth. A marriage shaken by doubt. Jesse, a direct descendant of Boaz and Ruth, was a respected leader in Bethlehem, so righteous that he was counted worthy to sit on the Sanhedrin, Israel's highest council of elders. But in his later years, Jesse was plagued by doubt that would change his family forever. Though he came from the royal tribe of Judah, he began to question his own lineage. His fears stemmed from a dark chapter in his family's history, scandalous union of Judah and Tamar, Genesis 38. The thought tormented him. What if my bloodline is tainted? What if I have passed down an impure heritage? What if my children are unworthy before God? These doubts consumed him until he made a devastating decision. He separated from his wife Nitzevet. Though he did not divorce her, he vowed never to have children with her again, believing it was better to avoid fatherhood than to risk producing an unworthy heir. For years, Nitzevet suffered in silence. She had done nothing wrong, yet she bore the weight of his rejection. She lived unseen, unheard, unwanted, but God had not forgotten her. A bold deception that changed history. As time passed, Jesse's doubts deepened. Desperate to resolve his inner conflict, he devised a radical plan, a way to have another child without passing his tainted lineage to the next generation. Following an ancient custom similar to Sarah, offering Hagar to Abraham, Jesse decided to have a child through Nitzevet's maidservant, believing this would ensure a pure Israelite bloodline. But Jesse was deceived. The loyal maidservant had watched Nitzevet's silent suffering for too long. She could no longer bear the injustice. In an act of courage and compassion, she conspired with Nitzevet to switch places on the appointed night, just as Leah had replaced Rachel on Jacob's wedding night. Under the cover of darkness, Jesse unknowingly spent the night with his own wife, Nitzevet. And from that night, David was conceived. But what should have been a moment of joy became a scandal. When Nitzevet was found pregnant, Jesse was horrified. He was certain she had committed adultery in his mind. There was no possible way she could be carrying his child. The whispers began. The once respected wife of Jesse was now a woman of shame. Her sons, David's own brothers, turned their backs on her. To them, she was a disgrace to the family. Rather than defend herself, Nitzevet remained silent, bearing the shame alone. She knew the truth, but she also knew that one day, God would reveal it. Rejected by men, chosen by God. From the moment of his birth, David's life was marked by rejection. A whispered scandal surrounded his arrival. His father barely acknowledged him. His brothers despised him. He was the son no one wanted, the outcast of his own family. So when the prophet Samuel arrived in Bethlehem, seeking to anoint Israel's next king, Jesse, David's father, didn't even bother mentioning his name. "Are these all the sons you have?" Samuel asked. Jesse replied, "There is still the youngest, but he is tending the sheep." 1 Samuel 16:11. To Jesse, David was not a son to be presented, only a servant to be hidden. His brothers saw him as nothing more than a nuisance. That's why, when David arrived at the battlefield, bringing food for them while Goliath taunted Israel, his eldest brother, Eliab, scorned him. "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. 1 Samuel 17:28. They treated him like an intruder, not a brother. David himself later wrote, "I have become a stranger to my brothers, an alien to my mother's children." Psalm 69:8. He was not just ignored, he was unwanted, a shepherd in the wilderness. David wasn't merely the youngest son, he was the forgotten one. While his brothers stood tall as warriors in King Saul's army, he was left alone, watching over sheep in the hills of Bethlehem. His only task? Tending the flock. It was the lowest job in the household, dirty, lonely, and dangerous. While others sat around the fire, sharing stories and laughter, David spent his nights under the vast, empty sky, the cold wind biting at his skin. His only company? The sheep. But in the silence of the wilderness, David found something his brothers never did: the presence of God. While they rejected him, God embraced him. While they saw him as illegitimate, God saw a king. And so, in the solitude of the fields, David began to sing. His heart became his voice, pouring out songs of longing, sorrow, and unshakable trust in the God who saw him when no one else did. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul." Psalm 23:1-3. Even when wild beasts crept in, lions prowling in the darkness, bears rising to attack, David did not run. With a sling in his hand and faith in his heart, he stood his ground. He had no idea that his songs, carried by the wind, were about to reach the ears of a troubled king. Summoned to the palace, a shepherd in the halls of power. One night, in the heart of the royal palace, King Saul sat in torment. A dark spirit haunted him, whispering fear, fueling his rage. The mighty king of Israel, chosen by God, was unraveling before his court. Desperate, his advisors searched for a cure. "He needs music," one suggested. "A skilled harpist, someone whose melodies can bring him peace." A name surfaced: David. The shepherd boy's music had already begun making ripples beyond Bethlehem. And so the forgotten son was suddenly called to stand before the king. When David entered the palace, the contrast was staggering: his simple shepherd's garments against the splendor of royal halls. Gold-lined walls, the scent of incense in the air, noblemen whispering, guards standing at attention. But David was not afraid. He had faced lions. He had faced bears. What was a troubled king compared to them? Taking a deep breath, he sat down. His fingers touched the harp. Music that drove out darkness. The first note rang out pure, steady, full of faith. Like a river, the melody flowed through the throne room, reaching the very soul of the tormented king. But this was more than music. It was prayer, woven into sound. The darkness that had wrapped itself around Saul began to lift. His clenched fists relaxed, the storm in his eyes calm. For the first time in days, peace settled over him. Saul looked at David not with rage, but with something new: relief. From that night on, whenever the darkness returned, David was summoned, and each time, the shadows fled. He had entered the palace not as a warrior, but as a musician. But God had bigger plans. David, the shepherd who defied a giant and became a king. David was just a shepherd, dividing his time between tending his father's sheep and serving in King Saul's court. But everything changed when a giant stepped onto the battlefield. For 40 days, Goliath, the Philistine champion, mocked Israel's army. Clad in bronze armor, wielding a spear as thick as a weaver's beam, he dared anyone to fight him. No one in either Saul nor David's brother had the courage. Then David arrived, not as a soldier, not as a warrior, just a messenger, bringing food. Yet, when he heard Goliath's challenge, something stirred deep inside him. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? 1 Samuel 17:26. His brothers dismissed him. Saul doubted him. But David knew this battle wasn't about size, it was about faith. With nothing but a sling and 5 smooth stones, he stepped onto the battlefield. The Philistines laughed. Goliath sneered. But David stood firm. "You come against me with sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." 1 Samuel 17:45. Goliath charged. David took his shot. A single stone, one perfect hit. The giant fell. And in that moment, a shepherd boy became a legend. Hunted, yet unbroken. David's victory made him famous but also dangerous. As the people sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands," jealousy consumed the king. The very man who had once welcomed David into his palace now sought his life. David became a fugitive. Fleeing across the land he was destined to rule. He hid in caves, lived among outcasts. Twice had the chance to kill Saul. Twice he refused. Even in exile he worshipped, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer." Psalm 18:2. Years passed. Saul's reign crumbled, until one day he fell in battle, and the throne was left empty. From shepherd to king. At last, David was crowned king of Israel. The rejected son became the ruler of God's people. He conquered Jerusalem, brought the Ark of the Covenant to the city, and established a kingdom of strength and worship. His victories expanded Israel's borders. His psalms echoed through generations. But his greatest legacy wasn't his throne, his conquests, or even his songs. It was a promise. From David's lineage would come the Messiah Jesus Christ, the Son of David. A shepherd's harp, a giant's fall, a fugitive's faith, and through it all, God was writing a story far bigger than a kingdom. He was writing eternity, lessons, and prayers. God sees the rejected and unnoticed. Even when the world overlooks us, God sees our worth and calls us by name. Like Nitzevet and David, we may feel forgotten, but God has a purpose for us. Lord, remind me that I am never invisible to you. When others reject me, let me find my identity in your love. Faith, not status, determines destiny. Jesse doubted his lineage. David's brothers doubted his strength, and Saul doubted his ability. But God doesn't choose. Based on human qualifications, He looks at the heart. Father, help me trust in your calling over my life, even when others doubt me. Strengthen my faith to walk boldly in your purpose. God's plans prevail. Despite opposition, David faced rejection, exile, and danger, but nothing could stop God's plan for him. Our setbacks are never the end of the story. God is still writing it. Lord, even when I face obstacles, help me trust that your plans for me cannot be canceled. Give me patience and perseverance. Worship prepares us for victory. David's time in the wilderness, worshiping and trusting God, prepared him to face giants and rule as king. Seeking God in private brings victory in public. God, teach me to worship you in every season. When I feel alone in the wilderness, when I face battles, and when I walk in blessing in the palace, let my heart always seek you first. God redeems every pain for his glory. Nitzevet's suffering, David's rejection, and even Jesse's doubts were all used to fulfill God's greater plan. No situation is beyond God's redemption. Father, even when I don't understand my circumstances, help me trust that you are working all things for good. Use my life for your glory.
I know you have been blessed. Let me know in the comments section which Bible story you would like me to share next. Kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please comment, like, and share. God bless you. Amen.